My name is Cindy, and I'm 36 years old. I didn't want anything big for my birthday. No speeches, no surprises, no emotional landmines disguised as jokes. I asked for one thing and one thing only, and I asked it clearly the day before. Please just be decent to Ava. Not warm, not affectionate, not doting, just decent. My mom laughed it off and said I was being dramatic. My dad didn't respond at all, which in our family usually meant trouble was already scheduled. They've always had a strange relationship with my daughter. Ava is 13, observant, introverted, and quietly confident in a way that makes people uncomfortable when they're used to performative charm. She notices everything and speaks only when she means it. Unfortunately for her, she was born into a family that values polished smiles and polite silence over honesty. She doesn't fit their mold, and they've never forgiven her for it. Things hadn't been great for a long time. Little comments slipped in under the radar, jabs about her weight disguised as concern, remarks about her tone. At holidays, they'd forget her favorite foods. At birthdays, they'd give her gifts that felt more like instructions than presents. Self-help books for teen girls with big feelings, journals about gratitude, anything that implied she was the problem that needed fixing. Once my mom told her not to wear yellow because not every color flatters everyone, sweetie. I said something that time and got told I was too sensitive. I learned to pick my battles, and that was my first mistake. Still, I invited them to my birthday dinner. Habit, maybe. Hope, probably. Or the stubborn belief that if I explained myself clearly enough, if I begged gently enough, they might act like normal, loving grandparents for one night. We booked a small Italian place Ava liked, all string lights and big windows. I let her pick it. She smiled when I told her. She even wore the blouse my mom gave her last Christmas, the one she'd never worn before. Maybe she thought it would help. Everyone arrived on time. My husband, a few close friends, some cousins. The vibe started light. My mom showed up in the same dress she wears to every event, like a uniform for being seen. My dad looked bored within 5 minutes, already scrolling on his phone. Ava sat beside me, quiet and polite, trying. For a while, it felt normal. We ordered, laughed, joked. I felt myself relax, just a little. Maybe I'd been too tense. Maybe this time would be different. Then dessert came. Someone made a joke about parenting. I don't even remember what it was. Ava, in that matter-of-fact teen voice, said she didn't think she wanted kids when she grew up. It wasn't rude. It wasn't deep. People chuckled. Even I smiled. Then my mom turned sharply and locked eyes with Ava. She leaned in close and whispered something I couldn't hear. Ava blinked and lowered her head, fingers tightening around her spoon. I leaned in and asked what was said. My mom shrugged, sipped her wine, and then said loud enough for everyone to hear, I told her, we don't sit with mistakes. The table went quiet for half a second. Then someone laughed. A cousin, maybe nervous, maybe clueless. That was all it took. The tension broke the wrong way. Ava stared at her lap like she was trying to disappear. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I stood up, took her hand, and walked out. No scene. Just silence. And every head at that table turning to watch us leave. We didn't take the cake. At home, Ava went straight to her room and curled up with her sketchbook. She didn't ask for dinner. She didn't cry. That hurt more than tears would have. Around 10, my phone buzzed. A text from my dad. You're still covering the car payment tomorrow, right? No mention of what happened. No mention of Ava. I stared at it for a long time and then replied, not for people who humiliate my kid. By morning, I had 48 missed calls. When I woke up and saw the missed calls stacked like a warning sign, I didn't feel startled or guilty. I felt exposed, like the last layer of denial had finally peeled away. 16 calls from my dad, 9 from my mom, a handful from my sister, even one from my brother, who never called unless he wanted something handled. I didn't return any of them. I made breakfast, packed Ava's lunch, and watched her sit at the table drawing in silence, the way she did when she was processing something too big to name. By mid-morning, the family group chat lit up, not with apologies, not with concern for Ava, but with messages designed to sound reasonable. We're all tired. Don't make this about money. Ryan's just a kid, Cindy. Not a single word about what was said. not a single question about how my daughter was doing. It was like the humiliation had never happened, like Ava had simply vanished from the story the moment it became inconvenient. That's when I finally understood what my role had been all along. I wasn't a daughter, I wasn't a sister, I was infrastructure. The quiet ATM that made sure everything kept running smoothly while everyone else got to pretend things were fine. For nearly a year, I'd been covering the car payment, insurance, and a shared account because my mom kept locking herself out and refused to learn how to manage it. It started as temporary help. It always does. Then it became expected. Then it became invisible. Growing up, every disagreement ended the same way. I apologized to keep the peace. I smoothed things over so no one had to sit with discomfort. I didn't even realize I'd been trained that way until I stopped. When my mom finally called that afternoon, her voice was calm, almost gentle. She didn't ask how Ava was. She said she noticed the payment hadn't gone through and wanted to make sure it was a mistake. I told her it wasn't. She paused and said, "But that's your father's car." I said, "And that's my daughter you humiliated." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. Then she asked the question that made everything click. "So what are we supposed to do now?" No apology, no accountability, just logistics. They hadn't gotten used to my help. They believed they were entitled to it. By Thursday, the automated emails started. Past due notices, polite reminders that would soon turn less polite. My dad left 2 voicemails pretending to be calm, asking if I wanted to come over and talk. When I didn't respond, the tone shifted to lectures about respect and family loyalty. Then came the text that sealed it. "You're really going to do this to us over a kid being a little too honest." I didn't reply. It wasn't about one comment. It was about years of watching my daughter be minimized while everyone laughed. When the second payment failed, I removed my name from autopay entirely. They didn't notice right away. They were used to the money just appearing, the problems dissolving before they became visible. My silence was probably assumed to be compliance. On the 5th day, the calls escalated. My dad, my mom, my sister. Then calls from my niece's phone, my aunt's number, even a restricted line. I ignored all of it. I wanted them to know I was choosing not to answer. That night, I took Ava out to dinner. Just us. She brought her sketchbook and drew quietly while we waited. At one point, she showed me a drawing of a waiter carrying 3 trays and said she was practicing people now, not just animals. I asked why. She shrugged and said she didn't want to leave anyone out. I swallowed hard and smiled because I knew exactly who had always been left out. When we got home, I started undoing everything. Accounts, passwords, shared calendars, the gas card I'd given my dad because he hated apps. I didn't announce it. It just stopped. They thought I was punishing them. I was protecting my child and myself. They still didn't understand. Not yet. They thought this would blow over. They thought I'd come back once the noise got uncomfortable. They didn't realize the moment with the cake wasn't the beginning of the conflict. It was the end of my compliance. The 5th day was when panic finally showed its face. Up until then, they'd treated my silence like a phase, something I'd snap out of once the inconvenience became too loud. They assumed I'd get uncomfortable before they did. That's how it had always worked. I absorbed discomfort so they didn't have to. This time, I didn't. My dad was the first to crack. He left a voicemail early that morning, his voice tight and clipped, saying the bank had called about the car and the insurance. He didn't say please. He didn't say sorry. He said, "This is getting out of hand." Like I'd spilled something and walked away instead of cleaning it up. My mom followed an hour later with a text about stress and blood pressure and how hard this was on everyone. Still nothing about Ava, not a word. By lunchtime, they'd moved into phase 2, the guilt tour. My sister called and said our parents were really not doing well and asked if I could just help temporarily while they figured things out. I asked her if anyone had checked on Ava. She hesitated, then said, "You know how Mom is." That wasn't an answer. That was an excuse. I told her no and hung up before she could keep talking. The calls kept coming. They started reaching out to people around me, hoping someone else would do the convincing for them. A friend texted me asking if I was okay because my mom had messaged her out of nowhere, saying I seemed overwhelmed, and Ava was extra sensitive lately. Sensitive. That was their word for cruelty that made them uncomfortable. I didn't correct the story. I didn't defend myself. For the first time in my life, I let them sit with the narrative they'd created without rushing in to fix it. Then they went around me. I didn't know at first. I was folding laundry that evening when Ava knocked on my bedroom door. She looked calm in a way that made my stomach drop. She said, "Grandma called me." The air left my lungs. I asked what she said. Ava told me my mom said she missed her, that families forgive each other, that she didn't mean to hurt her feelings. Then she asked if Ava wanted to come over next weekend. Ava said she told her she had homework. She'd blocked the number afterward on her own. I sat on the bed beside her, heart pounding, realizing they'd crossed the one line I couldn't unsee. They couldn't reach me, so they reached for my child. They framed it as love, as reconciliation, as if I was the obstacle, the one standing between Ava and her grandparents. That night, my mom texted me like nothing had happened. I talked to Ava. She's clearly not as upset as you think. Maybe it's time you stop projecting your issues onto her. That was it. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't negotiate. I cut every remaining financial tie that night. Closed the shared checking account they still used just in case. Canceled the pharmacy portal I managed for my mom's prescriptions. Changed the locks. Removed the spare key from under the fake rock in the garden. I told Ava the truth, that they'd been calling and trying to get to me through her, that she didn't owe them access or forgiveness just because they were related. She listened quietly and then said something that broke my heart and healed it at the same time. "I used to feel bad for them," she said. "I don't anymore." Then she told me something she'd never shared before. Last year, during a weekend stay at their house, my mom told her not to eat too much bread at dinner, because it's harder to lose baby weight when you're short. Ava was 12. She hadn't told me because she didn't want to start a fight. I held that story like a weight in my chest and realized how much I'd missed while trying to keep everyone else comfortable. The next morning, I sent one final message. If you want to be in Ava's life, you talk to me. You apologize to her directly, without excuses. Otherwise, don't contact either of us again. 2 days later, my mom replied, "We're not going to grovel for something we didn't do. We love Ava, but we won't be manipulated just because you're emotional." That response answered every question I'd been afraid to ask. I never replied. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was final. I blocked their numbers, removed them from Ava's school contacts, erased them from every emergency form. For the first time, I wasn't checking the door or my phone, waiting for the next wave. I was locking things down. And that's when something unexpected happened. Ava started to change. The change in Ava wasn't sudden or loud. It didn't announce itself. It unfolded the way spring does after a long winter, almost imperceptibly at first, until one day you realize the air feels different and something that was dormant is alive again. The house felt calmer without the constant background noise of tension, without my phone lighting up every few minutes with someone else's needs. Ava started leaving her sketchbook out on the kitchen table instead of hiding it under her bed. She stopped flinching when her phone buzzed. She laughed more easily, with her whole face, not the guarded half-smile she'd perfected around my family. I hadn't realized how much energy she'd spent bracing herself until she didn't have to anymore. One afternoon, while I was cleaning up, I found a drawing she'd left behind. It was simple but deliberate. Me and her sitting on a park bench, sharing a slice of cake, both of us smiling. In the background was a long table filled with people who had no faces, just outlines. Above that table, she'd written the words I could never get out of my head. "We don't sit with mistakes." But in her drawing, we weren't at that table. We were facing the other way, backs turned, choosing something else. She hadn't just absorbed what happened. She'd rewritten it on her own terms. That same week, I got a call from a pharmacy where my parents used to pick up prescriptions. The woman on the line sounded confused. She said my mom had come in asking for help refilling something but couldn't access the account. She said her daughter used to handle it, the pharmacist told me, and that you were just taking some space. Taking some space. That was how my mom framed it now, like I'd gone on a yoga retreat and would be back any day, like this was temporary, not the result of years of harm finally catching up. Then a local charity I'd volunteered with years ago reached out. My mom had contacted them asking if I still helped with bookkeeping, explaining that I was overwhelmed lately. It was like watching someone keep setting a place at the table for a guest who had clearly left the building. They were losing control of the story and trying to stitch it back together with my name. Meanwhile, Ava was blooming. She joined the art club at school. She started baking again, filling the house with the smell of cinnamon and burned edges she laughed about instead of apologizing for. She stopped asking if her grandparents were mad. She didn't bring them up at all. That silence told me more than questions ever could. There was still one thing sitting between us, though. Closure, not for my parents, for Ava. I didn't want her growing up wondering if she'd overreacted, if there had been a path where she could have been treated better if she'd just been quieter or smaller or different. I wanted her to know, without doubt, that she had been right to walk away from that table. So I tried one last thing. Not out of guilt, not out of hope, out of clarity. I sent one message, one sentence. Ava is willing to meet with you once if you're ready to apologize to her face to face and take responsibility for what you said. No drama, no demands, just a door barely open. They responded 2 days later. We'll think about it, my mom wrote, but only if you're not going to make a scene. That was all I needed. They didn't ask when. They didn't ask how Ava was feeling. They didn't ask what they could do to make it right. They were worried about optics, about control, about not being embarrassed. Even when handed a clear path to repair something fragile, they still centered themselves. I deleted the message and didn't reply. That was the moment the last piece of hope I hadn't even realized I was carrying finally let go. Not in anger, in acceptance. I blocked their numbers, removed them from every contact list, told Ava's school they were no longer authorized for pickups or meetings. I erased them from our lives in the small, practical ways that actually matter. When I told Ava what I'd done, she listened quietly. I asked if she was sad. She thought about it and said, "A little, but not the kind that stays." That sentence settled deep in my chest, heavier and truer than any apology could have been. Thanksgiving came and went, just the three of us. Box stuffing, burned rolls, my husband spilling cider on the couch. It was messy and imperfect and full of laughter that didn't require permission. No one whispered, no one flinched, no one had to earn their seat. That night, Ava handed me another drawing. 3 people at a table beside an open window. Below it, she'd written, "We don't sit with mistakes. We make space for each other." I hugged her and let that line replace everything I'd been taught about loyalty and sacrifice. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. The quiet after Thanksgiving felt different from the other silences that had come before. It wasn't tense or waiting to explode. It was steady, almost respectful, like a boundary finally being recognized. For a while, nothing happened. No texts, no calls, no relatives, just checking in. I started to believe they'd accepted it, that they'd retreated to lick their wounds and tell themselves a story where I was the villain and they were the long-suffering parents who tried. I could live with that. Stories don't have power when they're kept at a distance. Then my phone buzzed with a notification I hadn't seen in years, a credit alert. I almost dismissed it without opening it. I hadn't had any financial surprises since I cut every tie, but the number stopped me cold. A balance change on a joint account, an account I'd co-signed years ago when my dad was just getting back on his feet. He'd promised it was for emergencies only. I remembered standing in the bank with him, feeling uneasy, telling myself it was temporary, that this was what family did. I'd paid it down, kept an eye on it for a while, then forgot it existed when life moved on. The balance was over $6,000. I opened the transaction list and felt my stomach drop. Restaurants, online shopping, a casino weekend, a hotel stay, and one line item that felt like a slap. Ryan's grad suite. Ryan was 13. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. They hadn't just used the card. They'd used it with confidence, like it was still theirs, like I was still the invisible safety net they could lean on whenever things tipped. When I called the credit company, the woman on the line was polite and thorough. She explained that because there was a long history of shared use, the charges weren't automatically flagged. Legally, my name was still there. That meant the debt was mine as much as it was theirs. I could pay it or I could dispute it as fraud and let an investigation decide. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after the call ended. Ava was in her room, music low, sketching. The old reflex rose up fast and familiar. Just pay it. Make it go away. Protect your credit. Protect the peace. That reflex had ruled my life for years. It had kept everything from falling apart, at least on the surface. It had also taught them they could reach into my life whenever they wanted. This time I didn't listen to it. I called a lawyer, not to threaten them, not to negotiate, to see everything clearly. We pulled records, traced accounts, followed the threads I thought I'd already cut. The picture that emerged was worse than the card alone. 2 utility bills still active in my name at their house. Internet and water. A hospital bill from 2 years earlier where my mom had used my insurance card because she didn't want to pay the copay. And then the one that made my lawyer pause. A refinance application from months back. They hadn't forged my signature, but they'd listed my deposits as part of the household income, inflating their finances to try to tap equity from the house. It's not clean, my lawyer said carefully. It borders on misrepresentation. That was the moment something inside me finally locked into place. This wasn't about hurt feelings or family tension. This was about protection, about making sure my daughter would never wake up one day to find our lives entangled in someone else's mess because I'd been afraid to draw a line. I disputed the card. I locked my credit. I sent cease and desist letters. I removed my name from every remaining account. I switched insurance providers. I shut every door I could find. It took days of calls and paperwork, but when it was done, there was nothing left for them to grab. They noticed. My mom showed up on my porch with a box, her face carefully composed. She said it was full of old photos, things she thought I might want before everything changed. I opened the door just enough to tell her to leave it outside. She nodded like she'd expected that. As she turned to go, she said quietly, "You're not the only one hurting. We're family. That used to mean something." I didn't answer. Inside the box were pictures from years ago, beach days, birthday cakes, smiles that felt staged even then. And tucked between 2 frames was a letter in my dad's handwriting. He wrote that I'd made my point, that this was the last stunt they'd tolerate, that family doesn't abandon family. He wrote that I'd walked away, not them. The last line sat heavy on the page. "You'll come back. They always do." I sat on the floor with that letter in my hands and realized how certain he was that I'd eventually bend, that I'd snap back into place like I always had. He didn't know that I wasn't bending anymore. 2 days later, another alert came through. A GPS ping from an app I'd forgotten was still active. The car. The old Honda I'd given them when their van died, still registered and insured under my name. The location showed it 20 minutes south behind a small repair shop. I called the tow company. They hadn't moved it, which meant my dad had taken it. I didn't call him. I didn't text. I went straight to the police. The car was recovered within a day. My dad avoided charges because it was returned without damage, but the warning was formal and documented. The messages that followed were frantic. My mom begged me to drop it, said it was a misunderstanding, said I'd embarrassed him. My sister sent angry texts. My brother asked what was wrong with me for involving the police. Then a voice note came through from a number I didn't recognize. It was Ryan, 30 seconds long. He said he didn't understand why everyone was acting like it was such a big deal. He said I was always overdramatic. He said maybe if my kid wasn't so weird, none of this would have happened. I listened once, just once. Then I forwarded it to my lawyer. That was the moment I knew there was nothing left to salvage. After I sent Ryan's voice note to my lawyer, something settled in me that I hadn't felt before. Not relief, not triumph, clarity. The kind that doesn't shake once it lands. That recording wasn't just a teenager being cruel. It was the distilled version of everything my family had defended for years. They weren't protecting a kid who crossed a line. They were protecting a system where someone had to be smaller so someone else could feel important, and my daughter had been assigned that role without her consent. The police process moved forward quietly. My dad avoided charges only because the car was returned quickly and undamaged, but the warning was formal and on record. He stopped calling. My mom stopped pleading. The noise that used to swirl around them like static finally went still, not because they understood what they'd done, but because they knew I wouldn't absorb it anymore. Silence is different when it's chosen. A few days later, an envelope arrived without a return address. Inside was a copy of an updated will. No note, no explanation, just the document. My name was gone. Ava's name was gone. My sister and brother remained. Ryan's name appeared prominently, paired with language about education funds and legacy. At the bottom, a line stated the changes reflected current estrangement and repeated disrespect. I read it twice and set it down without ceremony. I hadn't wanted their money. I'd wanted them to see my child as human. They chose not to. That was their legacy to manage. Then came the photo online. Ryan standing beside my dad in front of the fireplace, both of them holding matching mugs, smiling like nothing had cracked. The caption read, "Legacy in the making." I didn't comment. I didn't block the post. I just closed the app. The word legacy had never sounded more hollow. That same week, I did the practical work that actually matters. I called a lawyer, not to fight the will, not to reclaim anything, but to lock down our future, a living trust, a power of attorney. Clear guardianship instructions. Every loose end tied, every door closed with intention. Protection isn't loud, it's meticulous. Then a video came through from a number I didn't recognize. No caption. Ryan again. He walked through my parents' living room, holding the box of photos my mom had dropped off. One by one, he tossed them into the fireplace and stared straight into the camera as they burned. I watched it once, felt the heat of it in my chest, and forwarded it to my lawyer. Cruelty documented is still cruelty, no matter how casually it's delivered. Months passed. The house my parents lived in went up for sale. I heard it secondhand. The refinance had failed. Without my monthly payment, the math caught up. A voicemail came from my mom weeks later, slow and careful, asking for temporary help, talking around the truth like it might soften if she didn't name it. I deleted it halfway through. I already knew how that sentence ended. At home, something better was happening. Ava started drawing people again. She pinned sketches to the fridge without asking. She made cards, but only for people who earned them. One night, she handed me one with 2 owls on a branch. Underneath, she'd written, "Some people leave, some people stay. I'm glad you stayed, Mom." I held that card longer than any inheritance document I'd ever seen. I didn't lose a family. I stopped financing a hierarchy that needed someone small to survive. I didn't choose money over people. I chose a child over a pattern. I chose quiet over cruelty. I chose to protect the one thing they never would. They can keep their house, their stories, their favorite. We kept our peace. And for the first time in a very long time, the house is warm, the walls are covered in art, and no one laughs when someone gets hurt.